The alien woman stood at the edge of his farm with 4 small beings clinging to her torn clothes, and her violet eyes held something that made Farmer Jake Collins stop in his tracks, even though he had never seen anything like her in his entire life on Earth. She was tall, with skin that shimmered like oil on water, and her hands had 6 fingers each. But what caught his attention most was how thin she looked, and how the children behind her seemed even thinner, with their large eyes sunken and their movements slow, like they barely had energy to stand. Jake put down his tools and walked toward them slowly, because he did not want to scare them away, even though his mind was racing with questions about how aliens had come to his small farm in Nebraska and why they looked so desperate. The woman raised one hand in what seemed like a peaceful gesture, and then she spoke in broken English that sounded like she had learned it from old radio broadcasts. She said, "I will work your fields. Human, just feed my hungry children." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Jake saw her hand trembling as she held it out, and one of the children made a small sound that reminded him of a hungry kitten. Jake knew he should probably call someone like the government or the military, but looking at those children, something in his chest tightened because he had lost his own daughter years ago, and he remembered what desperation looked like in a parent's eyes. He nodded once and pointed toward his house and said, "Come inside first, then we will talk about work." The alien woman seemed surprised, like she had expected him to refuse or maybe to attack, and she gathered her children closer before following him across the field with careful steps, inside his kitchen. Jake pulled out everything he had, which was not much since he lived alone, but there was bread and eggs and some leftover stew from the night before, and he heated it all up while the alien family sat at his table watching him with those strange, beautiful eyes. The children ate like they had not seen food in weeks, and their mother made sure each one had enough before she took even a small bite for herself. And Jake recognized that kind of sacrifice because it was universal, across all species apparently. Between bites, she told him her story in halting words mixed with gestures when her English failed her. Her name was Zara, and she came from a planet called Vaynor that had been destroyed by a war between 2 great powers, who did not care about the small worlds caught between them. And her husband had died protecting their ship as they escaped, and they had crashed on Earth 3 weeks ago in a remote forest. She had been hiding with her children and foraging for food, but nothing on Earth was safe for them to eat except for certain grains and vegetables that were similar to plants from her world, and they were starving slowly until she decided to take a risk and approach the first human. She saw. Jake listened, and felt his heart grow heavier with each word, because he understood what it meant to lose everything and to be alone in a strange place, with no one to turn to. He asked her why she did not go to the government for help, and Zara looked down at her children with fear clear on her face. She said her people had been studying Earth transmissions for years, and they knew humans sometimes reacted badly to things they did not understand, and she could not risk her children being taken away or being locked in some facility where they would be studied like animals. Jake could not argue with that because he had seen enough news to know she was probably right about how some people would react. So he made a decision that would change his life, forever. And he told Zara that she and her children could stay in his barn, which he would fix up to make comfortable, and in exchange she could help him with the farm work, which had been too much for one old man. Anyway, Zara's eyes filled with tears that shimmered gold in the kitchen light, and she touched her forehead to the table, in what he guessed was her people's way of showing deep gratitude. Over the next weeks, Jake learned that Zara was stronger than any human, despite her thin frame, and she could work in the fields for hours without tiring, and her children, though young, helped in small ways like collecting eggs from the chickens who seemed to like them better than they liked Jake. The youngest child, whose name sounded like Mira, when Jake tried to pronounce it, became especially attached to him, and would follow him around the farm, chattering in her own language, and occasionally trying out new English words she had learned. Jake taught Zara about earth crops and how to operate the old tractor, and in return she told him stories about Vaynor, about cities that floated in the sky and music that could change colors and oceans that glowed at night with living light. He found himself looking forward to their conversations in the evening after work, when they would sit on his porch and watch the sunset, while the children played in the yard catching fireflies and laughing in that universal language of childhood joy. But Jake knew this peace could not last forever, because people in town had started asking questions about why his farm was suddenly doing so well, and why they sometimes saw strange figures moving around his property at dawn. One afternoon, A black car pulled up his driveway and two people in suits stepped out with serious faces, and Jake felt his blood run cold. They said they were from a government agency that investigated unusual phenomena, and they had received reports about his farm, and they wanted to ask him some questions. Jake stood his ground on his porch and told them there was nothing unusual here, just an old man trying to keep his farm running. But then Mira ran around the corner of the house chasing a butterfly and stopped when she saw the strangers, and her skin flickered through several colors in fear. The agents reached for their weapons, and everything happened very fast. Zara appeared from the barn moving faster than human eyes could follow, and she put herself between her daughter and the agents with her arms spread wide. Jake stepped forward too and shouted for everyone to stop, and the agents froze because his voice carried the authority of a man who would not back down on his own land. He told them that this woman and her children were under his protection, and they were not a threat to anyone, and if the government wanted to take them, they would have to go through him first. One of the agents, a woman named Claire who looked tired and conflicted, lowered her weapon and asked Zara directly if she meant any harm to Earth or its people. Zara shook her head and said in her clearest English yet that all she wanted was a safe place to raise her children, and that her people had no interest in conquest, only in survival. Claire looked at her partner, and then at Jake, and then at the children who were now huddled together behind their mother, and something in her expression softened. She said that officially they had found nothing unusual at this location and that their investigation was closed, but she also said that if anything changed or if there were any threats, Jake should contact them immediately. Then she handed him a card and got back in the car and drove away. Jake let out a breath. He did not know he had been holding, and Zara turned to him with gratitude and relief playing on her alien face. That night they had a celebration of sorts with a dinner made from both Earth and Vaynor recipes that Zara had adapted using local ingredients, and the children performed a traditional dance from their world that involved spinning and humming in harmony. Jake watched them and felt something he had not felt in years, which was that he was part of a family again. Months passed, and the farm prospered in ways it never had before, and Jake taught Zara's children to read and write in English while Zara taught him words in her language. Sometimes at night, Jake would look up at the stars and wonder if somewhere out there other refugees were searching for safe harbors, and he hoped they would find humans willing to help them the way he had helped Zara, because in the end it did not matter that she was alien or that her skin changed colors, or that she had 6 fingers. What mattered was that she was a mother who loved her children and a person who worked hard and kept her word. And that was enough for Jake Collins, and when Mira called him grandfather. For the first time in careful English, his eyes got misty and he realized that sometimes family was not about blood or even about species. It was about who showed up when things got hard and who stayed when things got better, and who chose to build a life together, despite all the reasons they could have walked away. Zara kept her promise and worked his fields, and Jake kept his promise and fed her hungry children, and together they created something neither of them expected, which was a home.